So one of the pieces of feedback I got on my previous videos is that I may have been going a little bit too far ahead and moving too quickly. So I want to take a step back and go over some poker basics. One of the things that seemed to confuse people is the concept of ranges that I was talking about. So what I want to do here is just go over a basic idea of what is a range, why is it important, and why you need to learn it to progress and be better at poker. So if you have any questions that after this video, please put them in the comments. I'd be happy to talk about it more. And if you have any other topics you'd really like to see me cover, I would also love any suggestion on that. And here we go. So what is a range? Many people make the error in poker of trying to guess people's exact hands. They'll say, oh, they only have aces here. Oh, they only have this here. And that's really not the most effective way to view the game. Players can have a lot of different hands at any given time based on the actions they've taken. Those hands they can have make up their range. A range at its core is just the hands that a player can have at any point. Now, what I mean by that is every player starts pre-flop with any possible hand. No action has taken place and all the cards have been randomized. They're dealt to everybody face down, and nobody's made any bets, nobody's made any calls, nobody's done anything. So anyone can have any two cards. A range always changes based on action. If someone raises or calls, or if they fold, but that's not going to be as relevant to your in-game, their range is going to be impacted. And when we visualize a range off table, it's best to do it in a grid form, which I will cover on the next slide. There's also a shorthand way of writing it, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But it tends to help me to have a visual. Now, range interaction, basically what cards we have and what cards our opponent can have, is the core of poker. And yes, you can beat very low stakes poker without an understanding of ranges on any significant level, but you will hit a ceiling as you start to run into better players. So for the visual representation, this is an empty range chart. You can see there's nothing highlighted, and this is a partially filled in one. So anything with a 1 next to it means we have all of these hands all the time. A 0 means that we never have these hands, and any number in between means we sometimes have these hands. This is not any particular range. I just highlighted a bunch of stuff and put it in a picture here. How do ranges change? As stated earlier, ranges are impacted by every action in a hand. So if we bet, if we raise, if we call, things along those lines. A range can only get smaller. It can never expand. If we take an action that we never have with a specific hand, then we cannot later have that hand in our range. For example, we raise pre-flop and get one caller. The flop is 8 deuce deuce. Since we're not going to be raising 8 deuce pre-flop, we cannot now have 8 deuce on this flop. This is important to remember because I see a lot of new players making an error where they'll say that somebody had a hand that they cannot have because it's been removed by a previous action. So view a range as a funnel. Every action puts those hands through the funnel, and you have less and less hands no matter what happens. The largest change in range is almost always going to be pre-flop. For example, if someone's under the gun, the first to act, when they raise, most people immediately shrink their range by about 85 to 95%, depending on the game and the player. Why do ranges matter? Poker does not exist in a vacuum, so our actions over a large period of time are going to define our play. If we do not construct a reasonable range, we will end up in situations where better players are able to understand what hands we have too well and take advantage of that situation. Let's look at a very simple example. We're playing 1-2 heads up against a very tight player who only bets ace-ace. And when they raise, it is always all in. They fold every other hand to a raise in the deck. So we permanently have the button in this example, and we're the first to act pre-flop. That's how it works in heads-up poker. Don't worry about it if you don't know that. Our line here will be to bet 100% of the time and to fold every time we are raised. This is this is an extreme example, and the reason we can bet every time is because they're only going to raise aces. Every other time they have any other hand, they're going to fold, and we're going to win their blind. So we print money just by raising, and then every time they raise, we can simply fold because they have ace-ace. This is a very extreme example of what a lopsided range can do. Ranges allow us to see what flops benefit us and which ones benefit our opponent. And we're going to look at this a little bit in some examples later. And just to go back to my other part where I said in my other video that nobody pays attention to low stakes live, this is true. And like I said earlier, you can probably beat low stakes live without understanding ranges on an extremely deep level. That being said, you will do much better if you do understand them, and building good habits early is important because you're going to quickly run into a ceiling where you're not going to be able to progress if you don't understand this. So let's look at some different kinds of ranges, and I only put this in here because you will see these words used around the internet a lot, and I figure it's just best to have a quick little compilation. A linear range. This means the best X% of hands in your range. For example, at a live 1-2 game, your under the gun range should be the top 7 to 8% of your hands. This may also be referred to as a strong range. Polarized range, this is going to mean that our hands include both stronger hands and weaker hands as bluffs. An example would be something like if we were in a pot where somebody raised us and we were going to re-raise them or 3-bet them, we may have a combination of our strongest hands like ace-ace, ace-king suited, things like that. And we may also have some bluffs in there like ace-5 suited, ace-4 suited, so that we don't only have our strong hands when they call and they don't know exactly what hands we have. Let's look at the idea of a capped versus uncapped range. This is not super important here, but I see it written a lot, and I see it given wrong as a definition very often, so I just wanted to give a very simple example. Capped means that a range does not include the strongest hands, and an uncapped range can have those hands. So, for example, player in early position raises preflop, and we call middle position. The flop is ace-4-7 rainbow. We're capped at not having top set, since we would have re-raised ace-ace preflop. And this goes back to the other point. We can't all of a sudden have ace-ace here because we didn't do the action pre-flop that would give us ace-ace. The original raiser here would be uncapped. They can have ace-ace. They can absolutely have ace-ace and have top set. This is a very simple example, but it's just to illustrate the point. So let's look at some in-game examples of ranges. We raise under the gun at a full 9 max table, which is going to be your general live table. The big blind calls, and we go to the flop heads up. The flop comes 3-4-5 rainbow. What do we know due to our understanding of ranges and our opponents? So our first question is, who has the single best hand on this flop, which would be 6-7? Who has the other very strong hands, sets, and ace-2? And if the hand was to end at this moment and both players turn their cards over, who would be more likely to win? So you can take a second to pause this and think about those solutions before I go over them in a second. And we're doing a couple of these. All right. So this is important and a good way to look at when a flop is good for your range. It's not the only component, but it's a good one. Who has the best hand on this flop? Since we're under the gun here, and like we discussed, we're only going to have our strongest hands, we never have 6-7 here. We don't have 6-7 suited, and we don't have 6-7 offsuit. Whereas the big blind calling has a lot more hands, and they can have this 6-7 here, and they can have the strongest hand on the flop. Furthermore, they're going to have most of the strongest hands on this flop. We might have pocket fives, maybe, probably not, but they're going to have 3s, 4s, 5s, 6, 7, and ace-2, whereas we don't have ace-2 either because we're not opening that under the gun. And if this hand was to end at this moment and both players turn their cards over, who would be more likely to win? Now, this is a little bit of a different question. Now, even though this person, the big blind, has the strongest hands, we still have all the overpairs and the big aces and things like that, whereas their range is going to not have a lot of those. So we would win if we more often than not if we just turned our hands over as now and ended it. Now, I wanted to go over this, and then I want to do a visual of it, because this helps me a lot. When I'm trying to picture ranges and range composition, visualizing this in my head is extremely helpful, so I wanted to do this. Let's look at our under the gun open range. I don't care if these are accurate, really. I mean, they're reasonable, but that's not the point of this exercise. So here's an under the gun open range, and here's a big blind defending range. Now, on the example as stated, when we're looking at this low run out flop, we can see here that all these spots here on the big blind's defense range are going to be way more filled out than we have none. So we really don't have an interaction with that board. And we can also see if that we have all these big hands up here, and they don't really have those at all. So this is just a visual representation of what I just went over. And let's look at another one. Example 2. We raise pre-flop in the cutoff. The button calls and the blinds both fold. The flop comes ace-king 3 rainbow. What do we know due to understanding our range and our opponents? Who has the best hand? Who has the other strong hands? And who is most likely to win at this moment if both players turn their cards over? So I'm going to pause again real quick. All right, so let's take a look at this one. Who has the single best hand on this flop? I think this is relatively clear. Only we have ace-ace because we raised pre-flop in the cutoff and the button called. Yes, I know there's some smidgen of time that a button may call ace-ace there, but we're going to assume that they raise it every time for the sake of this example. So we have ace-ace and they don't. We also have the strongest 2 pairs here. We have ace-king. They probably don't. We have kings for the other set. They don't. Both of us probably have 3s. And really nobody's going to have king 3 very often. And if we were to turn this hand over right now to see who wins, who would be more likely to win? So in this situation, us as the original raiser on this high run out board is going to be more likely to win this hand if we were to turn it over now. Now let's look at these graphs. Here's our cutoff open range. We can see we open aces, kings, ace, all these here, things like this. And again, might not be 100% accurate, but reasonably close. And here's your button calling range. Now this, again, I tried to simplify this and take out some of these that may occasionally just call, but here's the point I'm making. They never have ace king, ace ace, king king, any of these ace king, even the good ace queens and things like that. So this flop is going to massively benefit us. We are going to win a significant amount of the time if we just turned our cards over right here. Furthermore, they're not even going to have a lot of hands that benefit from a lot of cards on future streets, but I'm not going to get too into that right now. So I hope we can take a look here, and let's take it look at one more example. We are on the button and raise pre-flop. The big blind calls our raise, and the flop comes 10 of spades, 9 of hearts, 7 of hearts. What do we know to understanding of our range and our opponents? So let's go through these questions again, and I'll pause one more time. Who has the best hand on this flop, which would be Jack 8? Who has the other best, who has the other very strong hands? Sets, 6, 8, strong draws like flushes and straights. And if the hand was to end at this moment and both players turn their cards over, who would be more likely to win? So take a second and think about it. Let's go over it. Well, in this situation, I wouldn't call it a trick question, but it's important to take a look at it this way also. Who has the best hand here? We both do. Both of us absolutely have Jack 8 suited in this situation. Both of us probably don't have Jack 8 off. Who has the other very strong hand? Sets, 6, 8, strong draws like flushes and straights. Again, both of us are going to have these. They may 3-bet 10s. They probably do sometimes. They may not. Same with 9s and 7s. We both absolutely have 6-8 suited in some strong draws, so all that. And if the hand was to end at this moment and both players turn their cards over, who would be more likely to win? So this is extremely close, and that's kind of the point. The in-position player would probably have a very small edge, but we're talking like 1% or something like that, maybe 2. It's not going to be a major thing. So let's take a look at these graphs and how this interacts. So this is a big blind defense range, roughly, and this is the button open range. If we look here in this region of where these cards are, like a 10, an 8, and a 7, both players have all these cards here. So this particular range is going to hit this particular flop is going to hit both players' ranges very, very hard. Now, yes, we still have the aces, the ace king, but on this particular board, especially in a deeper pot, this isn't enough to give us a range advantage where we want to start piling money in. So it's important to understand how different flops interact with different ranges, and this is another reason that understanding this will help you move up and even at low stakes make a lot more money. So some quick notes. I presented a lot of information in this video in graph form. You can also write ranges in a shorthand method. Like if someone has a pocket pair from 7s to queens, we don't have to write all that. We just do 7s to queens. Ace-jack suited is ace-jack suited plus. And thinking ranges versus individual hands can take some practice. Our natural inclination, as people, we want absolute answers. What does my opponent have? But doing exercises off the table like the ones we did here, and obviously way more complicated ones, will really help you. And when you are studying, and this is true of most poker situations, but especially as you're getting better and learning, focus on hands that are heads up to the flop. What I mean by that is somebody bet and one person called. They're far more common and simpler than multi-way scenarios, and you'll be able to learn a lot of the basics just drilling those. So I hope this video was helpful. I know I put a bit of information in there. If there's any questions, please put them in the comments. Any likes or subscribes are appreciated, and I'll have some more videos coming up shortly.